Besides 12-step work and sponsoring people, I don't think there's anything I've ever done in Alcoholics Anonymous that's changed me more than the 4th step. This is not a confession. This is a major shift in perception that changed my life. And we'll talk about it after lunch, and maybe it'll change yours. Thanks.
Hey, Bob.
Well, some of you came back. Whew. I don't know if I would have. So, if we've been following this process so far, we've started to develop a rudiment of faith as a result of our actions and seeing what's happening in our lives. We've gotten down on our knees with another member of Alcoholics Anonymous, as suggested on page 63, and we've said the 3rd step prayer. We've made the decision. We've formalized it by the formal terms of surrender in the prayer. And now what? Well, the bottom of page 63 talks about a condition that was true for me. It says, next we launched out on a course of vigorous action, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us never attempted. Though our decision, step 3, our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. And I'll tell you something, I said that 3rd step prayer on my knees, and for quite a while, I like the term blocked. I felt like I was blocked from God, blocked from you. I started to suffer. I actually had been suffering, and I got progressively worse with untreated alcoholism. I didn't identify it as that. I was having, seemed like some bad luck all of a sudden, and just I was fighting depression, and I would get down. I knew that God was the answer, and I had by this time some faith and a sincerity about the decision. I get that my life is in the hands of an idiot, and I got to let go of it, etc. I understand all that intellectually. So I'd get down on my knees every single morning, and I would say the 3rd step prayer. I'd come off my knees, and within 10 minutes, I would be in my head planning the whole day and running the universe. It's like I go up in here. It's like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. I got the screens where I put everything up. I got the Spock logical voice in my head. I got the passionate, dramatic Kurt, and I got the Bones, who just, no matter what's going on, he's just a little weird, and I got it all. And I'm full of anxiety. During this period of time, I went through 9 jobs in 4 years. That speaks volumes of untreated alcoholism. When I was about a year, right after I did my the 3rd step, I wrote an inventory, but I didn't follow the directions in the book because the book doesn't make sense to me. I don't know who Mr. Brown and Mrs. Jones is. I mean, I don't. It's like it's English, but it doesn't help. You know, it's I don't understand. And I'm not a dumb guy. I just read this and I can't understand what it says. I can't put it on and wear it. So I did what was so popular back in the late 70s is I wrote my life story. I wrote 40 pages of everything I was ashamed of, my deep, dark secrets, because I had ascertained from the place that knows all between my ears that the 4th step was really a cross between psychoanalysis and Catholic confession, which is neither. There's elements of both in there, but that's not really the gist of it. And so I did this great confession on paper, and I read it to another member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I made him suffer for about 8 hours. And, it was such an exercise in narcissism. It was, and I didn't get any better. Actually, I don't know, I wouldn't say I got worse, but I didn't get any better. The only advantage that came out of it is that I could go to meetings after that for a while and tout the fact that I did a fourth and fifth step when I hadn't really done a fourth and fifth step. That should be in the fourth step promises, the bad feeling of going to meetings where the subject is the fourth step and you feel bad goes away. I mean, that's like one of the fourth step promises. But I didn't really do what it talks about in the book. And then when I was about 3 years sober, I went back and I did another method of doing the fourth step. I followed the chapter 4 in the book, the 12 steps and 12 traditions. And if you've ever tried to do a fourth step out of that book, there's 30-some questions. I answered each question. I wrote a good portion of a page on each of the 7 deadly sins. And I got to tell you something, nothing changed. Because I'm not really, and I'm still blocked, and I'm still saying the third step prayer and running the universe. I'm still suffering from depression that I can't, I'm going to 15 to 20 meetings a week. I'm never going to less than 2 a day. And I got every service commitment there is. I'm on 2 convention committees. I got 2 hospital institution meetings. I'm doing 12-step work, which is saving my life. But I'm getting to the point where I can't outrun my alcoholism anymore. And there's not anybody in Las Vegas that's more active in the fellowship of alcohol in service than I am. And I'm suffering. I had some guy down at the TIE club, one of the AA clubs in Vegas, accuse me during that period of time of having my sense of humor surgically removed because everything was very serious. Self-obsessed people are serious people. I had a lot of self-righteousness. I was in general service, and I learned about the 12 traditions, not so I could be more useful, so I could beat people up for not following them and go to meetings and watch for tradition breaks, Boy, if I found one, it was like Christmas and... And I'm suffering from, all the symptomology on page 52 of the book of the bedevilments is in my life. I'm full of fear. It's a bad deal. Some misery and depression, all of it. Can't make a living. 9 jobs in 4 years. And it was an odd thing. I was chairman of a committee that brought, I'd heard some of the tapes, and I brought these guys, Joe and Charlie, Joe McQueenie. Joe got to me. We brought them to Las Vegas in the early 1980s. And I listened to them, and I realized it was good news and bad news. The good news is that I was a lot of stuff they're talking about I never heard before. The bad news is I realized that I hadn't done any of it. I hadn't done any of it really. And right after that, a guy that I sponsored asked me to help him with a 4th step. And so I just sat down with him after going through the Joe and Charlie thing, and I just went through the book with him. And when it said list, we listed. When it said realize, we tried to realize. When it said ask, we ask. And we just tried to literally take it as if it was a set of directions. And I'll tell you something, I learned more about how to do a 4-step, helping a guy do a 4-step than I could have ever possibly learned about doing a 4-step, trying to figure out how to do a 4-step for me. The Hindus have a saying that the student doesn't learn the lesson until he becomes the teacher. And I learned how to do a 4-step, helping a guy do a 4-step. And then when the suffering became acute and I couldn't I knew I had to do something. And I knew that I was phony in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was going around touting that I'd done all these step work, and the truth was I hadn't done it. And I had to swallow my pride and roll up my sleeves, and I started to write the 4-step as it's outlined in the book, and an exercise that would change my life irrevocably. Never been the same since. Now, it's not a cure-all. People that do great 4 steps drink again, but it got me on the path. It got me in. It freed me enough of me to start making a conscious contact with God, and to start to get the power. And now it's just up to me to keep the channel open. And I really was, when it says we were blocked, if you're like me, you can have an absolute sincere intention of carrying out the decision in step 3 and an absolute inability to do it. You're blocked. And not only am I blocked from carrying out the decision in step 3, I'm blocked from that thing they talk about on page 55, where we find the great reality deep down within us. And what people in AA are saying, that this God is within me, and I'm blocked from that. I don't have a conscious contact. There's no intuition. There's no God-centeredness inside of me. And I'm also blocked from other people. When the ego gets big, alcoholism becomes very lonely. And there's a creepy kind of loneliness that you can experience in the center of your home group, where you're surrounded by people you know intellectually care about you, and yet you are separate and apart from them. And because the ego pushes everything away. And I got just so full of myself, and so I started this process. And on page 64 of the book, it starts talking about setting us up for this and giving us a little indication of what's going to happen here. And it says, it makes an analogy. It says, taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process, an effort to discover the truth. Well, when I answered the questions in the 12 by 12, and when I also wrote the 40 pages of my life story, I didn't discover any truth about me. I mean, I put some secrets down there that I shared with someone else I'd never talked to another person about, but I didn't find any facts about me or face any facts about me. There was nothing new that came out of there. There was no shift in perception. There was no shedding of any blockage between me and God. None of that happened. Because I hadn't really done it. And the book goes on, it starts to talk, the next paragraph says something I think is the essence of what we do here. It says, well, we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out the flaws in our makeup which had caused our failure. Being convinced. Am I convinced? Being convinced that self manifested in various ways was what had defeated us. We considered its common manifestations. Do I get that selfishness and self-centeredness is what creates the separation between me and you and me and God? Do I get that it is as the actor who wants to run the whole show, in the action of unbeknownst to me playing God, I destroy myself in this attempt to manage my own life, to wrest satisfaction and happiness out of it? Do I get that? Can I see that? I think some of us have to suffer ourselves in sobriety for a number of years before you get clarity on this. I think maybe it's possible to come here and be a newcomer and get that. But I had to hit another bottom. I hit a bottom coming in the door, broken by the bag and the bottle. And then in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I had to be crushed by life itself, by my absolute failure at trying to make me better, just even trying to get along. And so we start the first section, and it's broken into 3 parts. I'm going to talk a little bit about resentment, and Polly might talk a little bit about resentment, probably talk a little bit about fear, And then we'll probably both do sex right up here on the stage. I don't. You better take that off the CD, all right? Sorry, Dave. Dave Pistol, if you're listening to this, it was just a joke. Trust me. Well, so what do we do? 6 things, and I will point them out as we go through it, and I'll tell you how I did it and how I struggled with it and my mistakes. So the first thing we do in dealing with resentments, it says about 5 lines up from the bottom of page 64, it says we listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. And that corresponds to column number 1, or the column on the left side of page 65, where it says, I'm resentful at. Most of it's people, in my experience. So we got column number 1. We're going to list the who's. And I tell the guys I sponsor, I said, listen, I want you to, when you're making your list of who you're angry at, I want you to be childish and petty. And the reason I want you to be childish and petty is because you really are childish and petty. And don't try to minimize it, because here's what the ego does to some of us. Ego reads ahead. It knows amends are coming. So we want to minimize some of this stuff, right? But put it all down. Matter of fact, when in doubt, write it out. Put it all down. I had a guy years ago who was 23 years sober, had never worked the steps. He was going to commit suicide, but he was afraid he was going to drink first. He didn't mind dying. He just didn't want everybody in aid and realize he lost his sobriety. And we start doing this process, and we get to the 4th step, and I said, I want you to make a list of people you're resentful at. And this is an uptight guy. This is a guy that in 23 years of sobriety has nobody in his family or his circle of friends left. He's pushed everybody away. And he's an ex-Navy chief, kind of a blustery, kind of tough guy. He talks to you with his arms folded like this. He said, resentments. I don't have any resentments. Well, you don't even have to know. You just watch this guy walk across a parking lot from 100 yards and know he's uptight about something. I mean, this guy's, he's blowing my mind. You don't have any resentments. He says, no, I just let that stuff go. I said, really? He said, yeah, I don't have any resentment. I don't hold on to nothing. I said, oh, okay. Well, let's do a little different. I want you to make a list of people you feel smugly superior to. And he gets this look on his face like, oh my God, it's going to be a long list. So list the idiots. List the stupid people. List the people that are doing it wrong. List the people that if there were any justice, they would owe you and probably the universe an amends. Put them all down. Indulge yourself. Then what do we do? After we run out of gas, we go down as far as we can on that list. We go back up to the top, and it says, we ask ourselves why we were angry. And that's column number 2, why. So we got who, now we got why, number 2. And if you'll notice on page 65, it's just little bullet points. Mm-hmm. It's not a lot of verbiage, not a lot of words, just little to the point. I think there's some of these resentments are so old, we got case files that are this big. Do you ever notice when you get a resentment from that moment on, that person can't do anything right? And every time you catch them at doing something imperfect, it's another page in the file. And it's fluff to justify the initial hating of them. And sometimes I got to have justification, because sometimes I'll resent you for something that I get it's childish. So I have to watch you real close to find other things to justify hating you. Right? And you know how we are. We find them. I think people like us we could spend a day with Mother Teresa and she'd end up on our 4th step list. Because we have that ability to see that. I bet you every guy I've ever sponsored and every guy I've ever known who has had this experience, there's a point where you just start picking your sponsor apart. Just start picking at him. Right? Just start picking at him. Just start picking at him. So those of you that Haven't sponsored anybody yet. I just want to tell you that so you have something to look forward to. But we do that. We do that. We have that noticer in our heads. It's good. Notices a lot. I can walk into my home group, me and God like this. Love everybody. Just key turns in my head. I just start noticing. Hey, you left your cell phone on? You didn't hear? You didn't hear the? Oh, I'm not going to say anything. I'm too good for that. Won't say nothing. That's your 4th cup of coffee, and you didn't put any money in the basket. Ain't going to say anything, but I'll find a way to punish you later. And it just, this little thing just starts, People getting up, walking across the room during the meeting, what do you get? Attention deficit? What do you need attention for? What do you get? It just starts. So on column number 2, as I just list the facts. 2nd grade teacher. Why? She embarrassed me in front of the class for not doing my homework, and I hate public humiliation. I had this whole peripheral case that would mean nothing. The fact that she did something to my friend Billy, and she hit Tommy with a ruler, and I don't even care about any of that stuff. I needed it just to justify my hating her. The real truth is she embarrassed me in front of the class. It hurt my feelings. And then the third thing we do, column number 3, the book uses 5 words to talk about column number 3, and it lists the aspects of self, and it says that we're hurt, threatened, injured, interfered with, or affected. Now, if you want to see where those words are, the very top of page 65, it starts where the things that were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up on our grudge list. We said opposite each name are injuries, or what was injured. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations which had been interfered with? And in the column, top of the 3rd column, it says affects my. So I'm looking for what was hurt, threatened, injured, affected, or interfered with. And it gives the examples of the manifestations of self. And how you know it's self? Change the pronoun from the 3rd person to the 1st person. And then it reads, in the bottom of page 64, we found that it was my self-esteem, my pocketbook, my ambitions, my personal relationships, which were hurt or threatened. So I'm listing all those things. And it has pride down there on the 3rd column towards the bottom. Pride's a big deal. I have a friend a dear friend just died with over 51 years, Ted, and Ted helped a lot of people. Ted used to say, yeah, there's 7 deadly sins. There's pride, lust, and 5 others. Pride's a big deal. Any of you ever spent time in Japan? Culturally, it's acceptable to kill yourself if you lose face. That's a tremendous. Anything that will overshadow the innate God-given instinct for survival is a tremendous force in human nature. I bet you there's people in this room that have thought because of embarrassment or the fear of embarrassment or public humiliation, had thought about killing yourself. Right? So pride, self-esteem, sex relations, ambitions, security, pocketbook, etc., gives all the examples. Now, the book it gives us a little pause and reflection after we do the first 3 things. Because at the bottom of the page, it says, we went back through our lives, nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we were finished, the first 3 columns, we considered them carefully. And then it starts walking me through a realization of the deadliness of these judgments. And it says the first thing apparent was that the world and its people were often quite wrong. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. And the usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. I was so driven by resentments. And what would happen to me, it was the foundation of all my depression, is that I would get all these judgments and I would angst up about these fears and resentments until out of absolute powerlessness and frustration, it would seem like I would implode into myself. And the book talks about that. It says that when sometimes it was remorse and then we were sore at ourselves because I can't really do anything about it. I can't really make them see. I can't really conquer my fears. I can't really change the people I resent so much. I'm stuck here. And the book spends all of page 66 talking about the deadliness of resentment. There's 7 spots on this page, and I'm not going to read the whole page, that sort of like death threats. I mean, it says these things are poison, they're infinitely grave, they shut you off from the sunlight of the Spirit, they kill you dead, they run you over in the street, they stab you in the eye. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on and on. All to bring me down to a place where by this time it sold me the idea that I must be prepared to look at these things from an entirely different angle. And it says that. We were prepared. Are you? Are you prepared to look at these from an entirely different angle? Hopefully, by this time, that you would rather be free than right. Hopefully, by this time, you'd rather be happy than right. I said that to somebody one time. They said, well, I'm happiest when I'm right. No, you think you are. You're not really. That's just fodder for the ego. That just puffs you up a little temporarily. Do you want to be free of these conversations you have with people that aren't in the room in your head? Do you want to be free of this stuff? Or are you prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle? And what would that look like? Now, if you're going to look at something from an entirely different angle, that's 180 degrees. You kind of have to get how you're looking at it to begin with. Wouldn't it be fair to say that the first 3 columns are my cases that I build against these people? It's almost like the position of a prosecuting attorney. Column number 1, I got the perpetrators. Column number 2, I got the heinous acts. Column number 3, I got the damage done, what was hurt, threatened, affected, injured, interfered with. These are my cases I built. I could take this to court. Show a jury. And I used to do that. I bet you most of you in the room do what I do. You get a resentment towards somebody, you just can't keep it to yourself. You got to explain it to other people. Right? Because I don't mind. It's not good enough that I hate you. I got to get a bunch of people on board with this. You know what I mean? Because I don't like to hate alone. Right? So I'm taking the position of the prosecuting attorney. So to look at this from an entirely different angle would be kind of like getting up off the bench, walking across the courtroom and sitting down on the defense table, and now we start engaging in conversations from their point of view. How would they explain what happened between you and them? I don't know what happened between you and them, but I bet you their vision of it is different than yours. What would they say if they were trying to be honest? How would it look to them? How would it look to them? This is a hard thing to do for a self-centered person because it requires a leap into other-centeredness for me to put myself in your shoes and look at it through your eyes. And the book's going to start walking me through a way to make this realization. It was funny, I was taking this guy through this before I'd ever done it. And we get to the bottom of page 66, and it says something interesting. It says, how could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. And I'm with this guy who's got a lot of resentments, and they're eating his lunch, and he's relapsed over them. And he looks at me and he says, well, what do I do? And I'm sitting there and I don't know. Joe and Charlie never covered this. You know, they just jumped from that right to the last part where you ask yourself the question, where were you selfish, etc. They didn't know. And I didn't know either. And I don't know what to tell the guy. And I looked down at the book, and the next 4 words, it was like they were in neon. It says, And it says, this was our course. And I read, and I said to him, this was our course. Like I knew. I didn't know. I was like, it just happened to say that. And we started to read the next couple lines, and it's talking about making a realization. Now, in step one, it brings us to the beginning of an inside job. This is beyond cognizant. This is not an intellectual process. It is not an academic process. You do not do this in your head. I mean, why would you? That's where all the bad crap happens. This is done in your heart. And we're asking us to make a realization. So something that has never been real for me, I have to make real. I have to connect the dots inside me in a way that I've never connected the dots before. I must realize that the people who wronged me were perhaps spiritually sick. Now, that part of this two-part realization is not that difficult. I can see easily you're sick, and somebody ought to straighten you out. Maybe, where's Dr. Kikorian now that we need him? I mean, I get that. You're sick and you're a jerk. But in the next line is what took me home. And it took, this has changed. I tell you the joy I get from watching guys make this realization because it changes their life. Here's what it says at top of the 67. Though we did not like their symptoms. What symptoms? Column number 2. The things they did in column number 2, if they hadn't been spiritually sick, if they had been right with themselves and right with God and right with God's kids, they couldn't possibly have done what they did in column number 2. It is evidentiary of spiritual sickness. I bet you most of us in this room have had long 8-step lists. I don't know about yours, but I'll tell you about mine. I had a lot of names on it, a lot of people I hurt. Honest to God, there was not one person on that list that I set out purposely to hurt. And yet I hurt them just the same. I hurt them in a desperate, futile need to make me better. And I stepped on the toes of people around me, and I broke hearts, and I ruined some people. I never meant to. If that's true for me, could that be true for the people that had hurt me? Though I did not like their symptoms, column number 2, and the way these symptoms disturbed me, column number 3, now here's the kicker, that I must realize that this person in column number 1, like myself, was sick too. Well, what does that mean? That means that I got to wake up to something I've always been too self-centered to wake up to. And that is the me that is in you. Is that I have to realize how the things that have drove you to do what you did in column number 2 are in me, and they've been driving me. If they haven't driven me to do the exact same thing that you've been driven to do, it's maybe because I didn't have as bad a childhood and I hadn't been hurt as much as you'd been hurt. Or maybe I just wasn't afraid to the level that you were afraid. But for God's sakes, can I get humble enough and honest enough with myself to understand that if I had been suffering as you were suffering, that I could have done what you did? Or do I still want to remain smugly superior? Can I get it? Can I put myself in your shoes and really wake up to what's behind the symptoms that are annoying me, which you did in column number 2? Can I see the fears that drove you? Can I see the me that suffers, that is also in you, and it suffers and drives you just like it's driven me? And what a powerful, powerful realization if I can make this through. And, you know, I've sat with a lot of guys in the 5th step, and sometimes I'll have to help them make the first 2 or 3. Usually the hardest ones are for child abuse and things from the resentments that are decades old. But once one of the major ones fall, it's like dominoes. They all start to fall. Because all of a sudden, the ego is pushed out of the way and you start looking at it from over here. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. The lights come on. And all of a sudden, a guy like me starts seeing all the people that I resented so much and how I don't see them the same way anymore. I start seeing a part of me in them. A part of me that I've always regretted. A part of me that I've never been right with. And it's in them too. And some of us at this point start developing something that we've only ever read about. We've never really truly had it. And that's compassion. Alcoholics are too self-centered for compassion. And compassion comes from two Latin words, cum, meaning with, and passio, pain. When you have compassion, you have an other-centered ability to sit with their pain. You get it. You get it. And you start to see the you that is in them. And you start to see past the facade of their actions and what they didn't call them, number two, to the suffering that drove, the things that drove them. You know, earlier in the book it says we are driven by 100 forms of fear, self-seeking, self-pity. And what do? What happened when we were driven by that stuff? The book says we stepped on the toes of our fellows and they retaliated. If that's true for me, is it true for others? Because it's either we're all God's kids, handicapped by the same stuff, and we're all on the same page, or none of us are. You can't see. I remember there was a thing, transactional analysis. There was a guy named Harris who wrote a book. I'm okay, you're okay. My version would have been, I'm okay, you're an idiot. Because I wanted to be okay and not have you okay, but you can't do that. In order for me to escape my own depression and my own self-pity, for me to stop beating me up inside, I had to stop beating you up. We're connected. It applies that in the Lord's Prayer when it says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. I didn't know that this part of the book would save my life years later. When I was in my 11th year of sobriety, I went through a tough year. 6 months of it were really tough. I mean, I could tell you stories. I'm lucky I'm not in prison or dead, or it's a tough time. And basically what happened, I was married, had a daughter that was almost 2 years old. I ended up going through a divorce that I didn't really understand at the time. I knew that there was some problems. We tried some marriage counseling. It didn't seem to work. My sponsor at the time, this is before I got Clancy as a sponsor, my sponsor at the time had retired, bought a big bus, was touring the country, didn't have a cell phone. I'd go sometimes 2 weeks without talking to him. And I'm in the middle of a divorce. And so I used a guy that I sponsored, Craig, who was like one of my favorite sponsees. He was my confidant through the marriage problems and the counseling and the whole thing. And my wife comes to me one day and says, I don't want to go do the counseling anymore. I just want out. And I live in Vegas. You can get a divorce quick in Vegas. And we got legally divorced on Thursday. The next morning, I discovered that my daughter and ex-wife of 12 hours had moved in with Craig, my confidant sponsee. And I discovered that they'd been sleeping together for about a year. And all of a sudden, I understood why the marriage counseling wasn't working, and why all of a sudden the veil, oh my God. Now I'm over 10 years sober, and you guys have been telling me for 10 years there's no such thing as a justifiable resentment. Well, this is an exception. And it's weird. You can go around AA if you know how to intuitively pick the people out. You can find people who agree with you. And I'd find old timers that would just say things to me like, oh, Bob, didn't you just buy her a car? And I'd go, yes, I did. And the nail holes in my hands from the cross would open up a little more, and oh, God, it was a tough time. I was nuts. I I won't even tell you the whole story, but I hired a hitman at one point. It was crazy through a guy sponsored that owned a casino. Oh, man. That's a whole story in itself. Thank God I could be. God's intervention in my life has sometimes been immediate and profound, and other times He works slow. And He's done some immediate stuff in my life. And I had to come back and go through this, and I knew it. I knew that the freedom was in, I had to make this much needed shift and perception to get free. And God took good care of me until I could make it. He threw new guys and some old timers in my life that asked me to sponsor them, and they were all going through relationship problems. I mean, I'd pile about 4 or 5 of these depressed guys in my car, and we'd just go from meeting to meeting. We'd be like the depressed section of the meeting, you know. I swear to God, I was down at the SOS Club one time, and we all came in together and sat down in the corner. And I heard the secretary say to the chairman, "Don't call on them." But these guys bought me islands in my day where I'd get so wrapped up in their pain I'd forget about mine for short little periods of time until I could do this. And I went and did it. I put both their names, column number 1. Column number 2, the bullet points, what they did, the lies, the infidelity, etc., etc. What was hurt, threatened, affected, injured, interfered with, everything. Pride, pocketbook, self-esteem, sex relations, personal relations. It split my home group right in the middle. It was just a tough time for a lot of people, not just me. Sponsees were taking sides. It was just a bad deal. And it says this was our course. I had to look at it from an entirely different angle, stop looking at it, Bob, from such a self-centered, judgmental point, and look at it through their eyes. What happened to them? What happened to them? And I had to put myself first in the place of my recent ex-wife. And I started to get a sense of what had happened. And I realized here's a gal who is not really involved in AA very much. She's sober 28 years probably. Hadn't been to a meeting in 16, 17 years, and she's fine. She never did need AA. And so she wasn't as involved in Alcoholics Anonymous as I was, and she just met a guy and fell in love and wanted to have a family and be married and have a house and all that stuff, like most women. And she found herself in short order married to a guy who was working about 70, 80 hours a week, had all these AA commitments, and he was just gone a lot. And she didn't have a business or a job or commitments in Alcoholics Anonymous. All she turned to was the marriage, and she was married to a guy that wasn't there very much. And she didn't have the things that I used to fill my life. And see, the sad part is I'm so self-centered that all my little empty spaces are full, so everything's good with me, so I don't even notice that they're not good with you. It's like if I'm okay, it doesn't matter about anything else. I'm okay. That's all that matters. I didn't even ask. I never thought to myself, is she okay? Never even wondered. And here she is. She finds herself in a desolate, lonely marriage. And she was an adult child of an alcoholic, and consequently, she didn't have it in her to even say anything. She couldn't face the confrontation of even saying that she was unhappy. And the resentment built and it built. And I don't know about you guys, but you get me resentful enough, vacant and lonely enough, and I can do things that under normal conditions I'd never do. And that resentment and that loneliness and desolation in that marriage eventually drove her to open a door and start an affair with the only guy that was around, because he used to hang around all the time. There he was. And I remember there's one point in the realization as I got it, and I remember thinking to myself, she must have really suffered and looked terribly in that marriage. And I felt ashamed of myself that I was so self-centered I didn't even notice. I was too wrapped up in, the book says, in our little plans and designs. This huge mega company I'm building, and my AA commitments and sponsees, and I never even stopped to ask or look or see. That's the self-centeredness. If you're self-centered people have a huge blind spot towards the world. It's not that we're consciously inconsiderate. I just can't see past myself to see you. Because all I see is me. All I see is me. And I started to get it. And I remember at one point thinking, how did she last as long as I could picture myself in that situation, driven by those emotions to do something. And I did ask myself the final questions on the middle of 67. Where was I selfish? My God, I was so selfish, I never even considered her. It was all about me, my little plans and designs. Where was I dishonest? The stories I would tell myself about what a great husband I was because I never cheated on her and I was a good provider. But it was where I really needed to be there, I wasn't there. Where was I self-seeking in my quest to fill up my own vacancies and build this business and do all this stuff? I never even thought about anybody else. It was always me, 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 me. And where was I frightened? I was terrified through the whole thing. I remember one point right before my daughter was born, I felt like I was going to have a nervous breakdown. I sponsor a guy, just went through this exact same thing. Because I'm a guy who I couldn't even take care of myself. And now I got a baby on the way and a wife that's dependent on me. And I felt the fear. I felt like my head was going to blow up. I felt like I was going to have a nervous breakdown. I'd never been, I didn't feel big. I wasn't big enough for this. And I was driven by a lot of fear. And so what do guys do that are driven by fear? We work hard. We stay busy. I could tell you a lot of excuses and justifications why I was so busy. You know, I had this amazing opportunity to build this business that I was able to sell a few years ago and pretty much retire and be set financially. And that's true. It was a great opportunity for me. And I could also tell you that I had to do AA. I got alcoholism. I had to do all my commitments. I had to do all that stuff, and that's all true. But also, both of those things were very convenient because there's another truth. And the other truth is, at that point in my life, didn't know how to do any degree of intimacy. And what happens after about 6 months in a relationship, I run out of all the funny stories to tell you about my childhood and the movies I like and the songs I like. And I run out of stuff to talk about. And I don't know how to do real intimacy, which is often done in silence together. And I don't know how to do that. I get squirmy. So I work hard and I do a lot of AA. Because and I have a good excuse to do both. And it was very convenient. And it filled the empty spaces for me and made her life even more desolate. And I got it. I went to make amends to Karen. And I remember telling her how sorry I was that I was so self-centered that I never even got it, what she was going through. And I told her, I'm so sorry that I left you alone so much and so desolate in that relationship that it drove you to do something I know you never would have done. And at some point in the conversation, she started to cry. And I think all she ever wanted was for me to understand and get it. You know, the day we got married, if I would have hired a group of the absolute brightest sociologists and psychologists from major universities throughout the country and brought them into a room and introduced them to Karen and said, listen, I got a job for you. You got 2 years to do it. You have to come up with a game plan that I could initiate over the next 2 years that would make this loyal gal who's devoted to her husband cheat on her husband. Can you give me something that would affect that? They couldn't have come up with a game plan any more effective than what I did over the next 2 years. And the tragic part is I'm so self-centered and asleep in my own life that I don't even know I'm doing that. Sometimes people hurt us seemingly without provocation. It means we're asleep in our own lives. I don't get it. One of the great blessings of step 4 is as you start to see the nature of how wrong you'd been in all these situations in your perception, the veil lifts, and all of a sudden, there's no mystery. All of a sudden, all the people that rejected you, you know why. You can put yourself in their shoes. You know exactly why they rejected you. You would have rejected you too. You know exactly why those bosses fired you. If you were them, you'd have fired you too. It's not a mystery anymore. I mean, some of us come here with just, like everybody's just, I feel like a victim. You're not a victim. When the veil lifts, it's like, oh my God, I got my fingerprints are all over this stuff. I'm the guy who did it. And I think 90% of all awakenings, I just pull my head out of my butt and get it. I mean, I get what everybody else has been seeing all along. And I was able to make amends to her, and then I did the same thing for him. He was a lot easier, actually. I was just talking to my sponsor about this. I sponsor him again. And, matter of fact, he just did me a great favor. He just put some carpet in my house over this last week. It was very nice. I put myself in his, and I had to put his name down. And here's the deal. Here's a guy who had me and my wife on a pedestal. He said to me one time, he couldn't even get a date. He said to me, he's so lonely. He said, God, Bob, someday I could just have what you have with Karen. I didn't know he meant specifically. I thought he meant kind of in a generalized way, I didn't know he meant direct. Well, when she opened the door and she started making moves on him, I'm a guy. Ladies, we're dogs. I'm sorry. We don't mean to be, but if anything, guys that I know that are sober a long time learn how to protect themselves from themselves. A guy can be in a situation with the greatest intentions in the world, and all a girl has to do is touch him a certain way, do a couple things, and where were those intentions? They were here a minute ago. I know. And I know what happened with him. He caved. And he hated himself for it. He hated himself. My God, I was the most important guy in his life. I was his sponsor. I found him in a detox. Almost killed him. I was able to go back and make amends to him. Because you know what I did? I went around Alcoholics Anonymous for about 3-4 months, and under the guise of needing to talk about this, I didn't need to talk about it. Well, you know what I was trying to do? I was trying to get everybody else to resent them also. That's horrible, isn't it? Some guy came up and told me, you shouldn't be talking about that. They're members of AA. Well, I need to talk. God, self-centered, childish. I had to go make amends. And so what I started doing is I started telling the truth. That I was really the guy who did all that. And I'll tell you, I started sponsoring him again, and we started almost becoming like a family. And this is odd. They got married, and then their marriage started to fall apart. And sincerely, I was trying to help them save their marriage. That's odd, isn't it? And I really wanted to. I remember coming home from a ball game where it was my ex-wife and Craig were there, and I was there, and we were cheering my daughter on. And I remember driving home and saying to God, God, if you'd let me pick a stepdad for my child, for my daughter, from anyone on this planet, I'd pick him. And I meant it. I'd pick him. He was a good stepdad to my daughter. Still is. The three of it, my daughter and him and I had a meal together just a couple of days ago, a few days ago. See, when resentment is put to rest, the restoration of love returns because you loved the person before they did what they did, didn't you? Right? It's only the resentment that blocks the love. It's the restoration of love. And I think what the 12 steps are designed to do is to craft me into becoming a more adequate lover of God's kids. I think that's the way. Polly.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
A little long, sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to just talk a few minutes on some resentments. Oh, he's bringing food over here.
I will split it with Polly.
I've had mine. You didn't have any lunch.
She said you
Um, anyway, when I got into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I came, as I had said earlier, through treatment. And I was in a treatment center that was a 5-step treatment center. And while I was in this treatment center, we did